everyone, and welcome to Day 2 of OnlineFest 2020 presented by Crazy Domains. I'm Krystle Nonis, your host and moderator for today's panel session. If you joined us yesterday, good to see you again. And if it's your first day joining us, welcome. We are live with our first ever Digital Learning Festival, and I'm excited to get started with our panel, Pivoting in a Pandemic. 2020 has been a curveball for sure, with COVID-19 forcing us to pause and pivot. However, this new norm has also presented opportunities for those willing to step up and change the way they think and work. And today's session will be exploring just that. We've got a panel of tech leaders and ecosystem builders to share their observations and advice on how your business can adapt to the changing market. But before I invite our panelists up on screen, a quick question. In one word or emoji, what does pivoting mean to you? On your screen, you'll see a QR code which you can scan using your mobile phone or an app scanner and share your answers. Now, for me personally, when I think of pivoting, I always think about adaptability. And some might agree. Others might use the words innovation, change, scary. So let's see what comes up on screen. Okay, so in one word or emoji, what comes to mind when you think pivot? Great, we see innovation there. Challenging. Yeah, I think definitely so. What we've also found with our customers is it is a challenging time given the current situation, but there are also opportunities for us to explore. Friends. Okay, that's an interesting one. I guess you do need to be surrounded by a very strong supportive community when you're going through this period. Survival. Yep. You can't really do anything at this point in time except adapt to the situation. And it is about survival and making sure that your business can get through this time. New uncertainty. Definitely. Pivoting really is about adjusting to our new norm and making sure that we can be flexible and cope with whatever is being thrown our way. Scary, yes, we feel you. There's a little party emoji. That's fun. I would love to hear from whoever sent that, and we can chat about that later as well. Anxiety, yep. I think all of these are really good points, and I would love to explore these and more when we chat with our panelists. So with that, I'm going to share a little bit more about who we have on stage. So first up, a familiar face if you've tuned into our keynote earlier, we have serial entrepreneur Jen George. Now, Jen George is the Executive Director at Genry Capital and Executive Chair at the Daily Skin Co. Now, she'll be sharing with us her insights on how the pandemic has actually shaped her own experiences as an entrepreneur and as an investor, and what she thinks would be some opportunities for small businesses and entrepreneurs like you. Now, next up, we also have Maxine Ryan, a fintech entrepreneur who has founded 2 companies and has had her own fair share of pivoting on her journey, and she'll be telling us a little bit more about that as well. And last but not least, we have CEO and Head of Product at E27, Mohan Belani. He'll be joining us and talking about the trends that he sees now and what's to come for startups post-pandemic. Let's welcome the speakers on stage. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hey, quick audio check. Can you hear and see me okay? Wonderful. Great. Well, thank you so much for being here this morning. We've got an international panel as always. We've got Jen and Maxine dialing in from Sydney and Mohan from Singapore. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So, okay, we've started off with a poll actually yesterday, and, we asked the audience a question about where they are at with pivoting. So 76% of you in the audience actually responded to say that they are in the midst of pivoting. Jen, maybe we'll kick off the panel by asking you, what is the word that comes to your mind when you hear the word pivot?
So for me, I agree with that person who said survival. I think Darwin's theory was, you have to keep adapting and evolving. It's survival of the fittest, right? And changing to every situation. And I think that's really evident in what's been going on around the world. And it's, you have to adapt, you have to keep pivoting to survive this pandemic and what's going on.
Absolutely. And Maxine, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, Gen totally had it correct, where I think as entrepreneurs, you have to constantly think that things are going to change, and you actually want it to change because it shows you that you're making progress. So I think it's really important for entrepreneurs to understand that failure is a relative term, and it's more that, oh, I have something in front of me that I need to solve for and then move around it and keep on going. I think also in a time like this, you have to be so honest with yourself as an entrepreneur whether or not your product is relevant anymore. And sometimes that can be really difficult to admit that, oh, actually the product that I've created had a fit, like a product market fit when, the economy was going really great. We didn't have a pandemic. And then kind of thinking about how to pivot into something that is, worthwhile for how the world exists right now. So a lot of people, especially in the textile industry, move straight into making masks just to kind of make sure that they can cover that period where not many people were buying clothes, or they had some sort of supply chain problem. And I think that's a really great example of how to pivot during this time, just looking at what exists and what you can make the most out of.
Absolutely agree with that. No, I think really good points. And Mohan, we'll hear from you. How does pivot relate to you? What does that word make you think about?
Yeah, so really good points by Maxine and Jen. For me, it's really a mindset, right? The term change is constant. It's always been thrown around, but especially during this period, it's become even more apparent, right? I would say that pivot shouldn't be such a foreign thing to, especially early stage entrepreneurs. And it should be something that's always top of mind to remain relevant and to always be on the cutting edge.
Brilliant. Now, so, we ran that poll, and the stat was that 76% of attendees today either have already pivoted or are in the process of pivoting. Does that come as a surprise to you, Mohan? Or like you said, it's a mindset. So this is something that you expected?
No, I think this is really good, right? So it's always worrying if early stage companies are taking too long to adapt and change. So it's great to see that a significant amount of companies have already started that process and are ideally a bit further down the road. So hopefully we can share some ideas to help them in that process. But it's really good to see that since we are still in the middle of a very serious pandemic issue, companies have started to figure out how to pivot, where areas they can try out new opportunities and started the process.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm just going to touch on something that Mohan mentioned, which is speed, basically taking too long to pivot, and direct that back to Maxine. So Maxine, you've obviously had quite a bit of change this year as well. Pivot's been a big word for you. When was that? How did that decision come about for you to start ProsperApp, considering your journey before? So I think in terms of speed, how did you know that it was the right time to pivot?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think that in my former company, BitSpark, we were pivoting every single month, it felt like, when we started in 2014. And I think that largely came down to the type of company we were running, which was a cryptocurrency money transfer company, which was the first that ever existed then. So you kind of had to change for the landscape. But I think what was interesting about my second company now, ProsperApp, was that I really had to think about scalability, because when we're talking about speed, we're actually talking about scalability more so than anything else. And scalability means your ability to grow in a market and get as many users as possible while having that infrastructure to support. And I think the main concept that I learned between my two companies is that my last company was very much a bridge between the physical and the digital world, where we were taking in cash to buy Bitcoin. It was a very cash-based focused company. And with this company now, even though, my mission has always been about financial literacy, I realized that we want to go fully digital. And I think that's what a lot of entrepreneurs are realizing now, is that the whole world is going to go in that direction. And this COVID period has just encouraged that to be a lot faster than we originally thought that we would be moving at. So yeah, I think number one thing everybody has to think about is scalability. I challenged myself to build an app in less than 22 days. And that meant that I had to make a lot of, I had to cut off a lot of the kind of grander vision of things that I wanted to look like. But I think that was good because it meant that I was able to produce something really quickly with ProsperApp. And having released that, we were able to get so much customer feedback that now the app almost feels like a community app, where our growth is really determined by our customers. So I think that's really important, is that to be nimble, to be able to produce something really quickly and then get that feedback to tell you if you're going in the right direction is much better than kind of going in this like slow way where you think you already know the answer, but the truth is in this environment, nobody knows much about anything. So you kind of have to be really quick, break everything as quickly as possible, and then kind of build up from there. And I know that like the good part about this is that, your users really love seeing your journey. Like, I feel that their emotional equity with helping you build something is really kind of undervalued in this market. And that we're looking for more community-based companies now, community-led companies. And I think that's kind of the main differences between how I'm leading now and how I've probably led before.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. I'm going to touch on something that you mentioned earlier about that sense of community. But before I get into that, quick question for Jen. So, serial entrepreneur and investor yourself, how do you see, or what do you see are opportunities for companies now in terms of going digital? I think you mentioned a little bit about this as well in your keynote, but what do you think, or how important is technology with companies at this point in time?
Well, I think if you even just look at the whole work from home situation, right? You think we've been talking about it for the last 10 years, going, it's the right thing. We need that flexibility in the workforce. It's how, the world is changing from physically having to be in the office to pick up that landline phone to, I can just send an email from anywhere. It doesn't really matter. And although we were talking about it for a long time, that real pivotal change wasn't going to happen for, over a very slow, long period of time. Whereas the entire world was forced to shut down, and all of a sudden you've got major corporations, their entire workforce working from home, and being able to still operate with, obviously there's some little hiccups along the way as people get used to it and work things out. But all in all, I think everyone's done really well. So I think a world pandemic like this has really ripped that Band-Aid off at the speed that people have to do things, and making them adapt and change from a necessity point of view versus here's a cool thing we can say on our recruitment slogan. And I think you'll see that, because of what's happening, it's really leveled the playing field. You're seeing large corporations that have been around for years, really having to pull their business apart and look at how are they going to keep moving forward. What in 2021, what does that even look like? Because certainly no one was expecting a worldwide pandemic and to all be, in semi-lockdown, or, the various variations that we've all been through. I think the beauty of it is that startups really now have a chance to really maximize this time. They've been able to get in front of meetings, in key decision makers that they probably weren't able to 2019 and prior. We're seeing startups who are doing, global deals over a Zoom call rather than having a 6-month, coffee catch-up, meeting catch-up, having the right people in the room catch-up, all the fun stepping stones with the process of that. Moving online, we're seeing traditional businesses like manufacturing businesses, like Australian Private Label has moved into 3PL for online e-commerce businesses. Within 6 weeks, it grew to a 50,000 orders run rate for the year. Which is just obscene. You'd never see that sort of growth in the online space in such a short period of time. So I think it's a really interesting time. You're going to see lots of businesses move hand over fist forward in growth. And I think you're going to see, and this is startups and big businesses as they adapt, but then also a lot of businesses who probably weren't going to survive anyway, instead of taking 2 to 3 years to wind down, they're going to come to a sudden halt, which is probably good for the industry because it means more talent in the space looking to join other teams or other ideas or start new things and kind of move the space forward.
Absolutely. Like how you said, it's kind of creating a new slate, a clean new slate for all of us. But just quick question to Mohan, I guess. How do you see this, E27s in the space of Asia Pacific? Do you see similar trends or, are there any specific opportunities that you have seen happen for startups, entrepreneurs, businesses in this region?
Yeah. So Maxine and Jen brought up like a lot of very good points, right? Like the whole idea of community-led growth, that has definitely been a big way where companies have been scaling rather than just purely using, digital ads or even the product-led growth model has been helpful for a lot of companies. Where even for us, right, that transition between maybe being an offline company to being a more product-centric company has been helpful. And then that going to that time to market factor has been a big thing as well. Like that 1% improvement that you can make every day is going to be way more valuable than maybe a big release every quarter. So I think there has been a rapid change in the pace at which companies have been able to do product releases, updates, changes with their community. And because everyone is online and everyone is, pretty much stuck at home, right? The ability to reach out to the user base has been a lot more effective. So I think we have definitely a all-time high in terms of customer engagement, communication with customers. A lot of companies have realized that they need to move that entire shift digital. So you've seen, a massive amount of Zoom calls, webinars, engagement experiences that have completely gone online. And you don't just end up getting a local touch point with your user base. You are able to get a regional touch point, right? Because now you don't have just a physical event or a limited time and space type event. You have something that's a lot more digital and prevalent. So I think organizations that embrace digital trends have definitely been able to tap on all of these opportunities to tap on community, roll out product faster, and engage their user base on a deeper level. I think the key question that everyone has to think about is, what happens when the pandemic lifts? I think these are some issues to think about. How does the product still continue to remain relevant? And how does your customer engagement strategy, product strategy, either evolve or retain depending on the next 6 months? And I think that kind of uncertainty is still very uncomfortable for a lot of companies.
Absolutely. I think you raised a good question. Like, how do you keep that relevant? I'm gonna flip that question actually to Maxine. So how do you think that what is post-pandemic look like for you and ProsperApp and your business?
Sorry, you just cut out. Could you repeat that for me?
Sure thing. So my question, Mohan made that comment, and I'm just going to ask that question to you. How does your business and what does ProsperApp look like post-pandemic compared to where it is now?
Oh, I think the thing is that it would look exactly the same. There really is, at least for my own company, not much difference for its existence for current users now and users in the future. I think one thing that the pandemic did make me consider is that it had to be able to generate revenue within a month of being released. And I think that sometimes with tech companies, they typically are not considering making revenue until about 2 years after, depending on how high tech it is or how innovative it is. Because usually investors understand that if you're kind of innovating a space, there's going to kind of be that grace period for you to understand what your product market fit is, what your customers are looking for. For me, when the pandemic hit and, I was kind of in between wondering what I wanted to do next to kind of complete my mission of financial freedom for everybody around the world, it really came down to, okay, I need to have my first iteration of my company, which is that it needs to generate revenue. And then I have my North Star vision. And I think that previously I would have gone straight for the North Star vision, where I would kind of allow myself that period, maybe 1 or 2 years of going, okay, this is all about just testing and seeing what we can build out of this, instead of being, okay, I'm going to look at the MVP, and the MVP is going to be able to be that backup float for that North Vision company that I already had in mind. So I think that was kind of the difference in my strategy, where I was thinking, okay, if I'm like worst case scenario, what can I release out there that can be just as effective to at least prove the thesis of what I wanted my company to be. And then after I did that, then I can start kind of moving quickly without kind of this pressure of wondering if you have a viable business or not. So I think people need to understand that when you have a business, there's typically what you first release, and then there's kind of like all those second, third stages where it kind of actualizes into what you'd like it to be. So to give you an example, with ProsperApp, what the customer sees right now is that it's a money mindset app that assists you with learning about financial literacy through quotes every single day. And when the customer clicks on that quote, it allows them to learn more about that quote, but more importantly, it suggests lots of different financial content, financial services, and products for them. Now, that's actually a very easy concept to build in 20 days, right? It's largely content, but the app interface doesn't really have much going on other than like a couple of flows. But the real future of this is that it's going to be TikTok for financial literacy. Now, that's a whole different ballgame, right? And then you have this whole like AI component in there that makes suggestions based off of the user activity that then shows them, hey, this is your taste profile. This is where you're at currently in your financial literacy journey. And here's a whole range of products and services that are a lot more involved than maybe buying a book off of Amazon or something. So that's what I mean by having to realize what your North Star vision is and then cutting it way back to be like, okay, how can I still prove that this works, but in the most simplest form possible? And then getting that user feedback to be able to build on top towards your North Star. So I like to think that my larger vision of a company is always going to be one way, but I'm open to the feedback that my users are giving me to get to that point.
I like that. So there's kind of a blueprint, but yet you still need to have a little bit of room to play and adapt to what the market is telling you. Thanks for that, Maxine. I think really good points. I'm gonna kind of flip the script and get a different lens, which is Jen's perspective. So you are an investor, and I think a lot of small businesses, entrepreneurs, and startups are thinking about, like Maxine mentioned earlier, no one really knows what's happening, and now more than ever, there's that concern about getting funding. What are some things that you would look out for in small businesses when they're kind of pitching to you during this time? Because of course there's a lot of change that's happening on their front, and they don't know what the runway looks like for the next 6 to 12 months, or even 3 months for that matter.
Definitely. And I think Maxine has said it perfectly. At the end of the day, nobody can tell what's going to happen in the future and how this is going to keep adapting, because nobody knew this was even going to happen. And I think from an investor point of view, or any business looking at their own, existing standpoint, they need to make sure that they're clear on the numbers, because at the end of the day, that's all you can measure things off. The vision might be very, very exciting and where you're looking to go, but you can't forecast things like a worldwide pandemic to jump on in the middle of it all. So personally, I always think that try and be focus on the revenue from day one. Try and work out a plan how to make sure that you're cash flow positive as soon as possible, and then look at iterating beyond that to then work towards that global vision, and assume that you're not going to get funding. At the end of the day, it's how do you actually make this business a viable business model on its own, and then if you get funding, it's about scaling that rather than being the make or break for this business to succeed. Because I think, unfortunately, there's been a glamour side, or the Hollywood side of startups that have kind of been around for the last few years, where I guess it's kind of like, hey, I've got a startup idea, give me $100 million and I'll make this happen. Rather than, okay, well, I need to make a viable business to solve this problem, and then getting funding as a secondary, stepping point to actually help you accelerate something that's already working.
Brilliant point there. So one of the things that we talked about in yesterday's panel, this phrase came up on our topic from the ground up. It was pivot, don't pirouette. So you mentioned in your keynote as well, to kind of test, fail, and then learn. But how much of that should it be? How much of your core mission, or how rigid should you be? I guess that's the question, in terms of sticking to what you want to do without kind of going too all over the place. Because I do feel that, even in a larger company, you can get pulled in too many directions. How do you create that structure to not getting pulled all over the place? I think that's
definitely. And I think I think there's so many different personalities in a business, as I'm sure we can all agree. I'm definitely the all over the shop, shiny light. Oh my God, let's try this out. And I always have to make sure I have somebody who's on the straight and narrow next to me. But I think that's why it's important to, you need to understand what your skill sets are, what your personality type is, and then make sure you are balancing that out. Making sure that, you bring everything back to, for example, you can do OKRs, which basically is a structure to make sure that, here are all the top 10 things that we need to do at the moment and that we're aiming for. And then here are all the little tasks below it that we need to do. And you've either done them or you're not. You've either hit the 10 new customers or you haven't. And it really gives you a clear picture of where you're at. And one of those things could be to test one thing out. Keep those tests really small, so it's really, precise. It's not like, hey, we'll just see if we can, test out the hospitality industry this week. It's got to be, hey, we want to sell, again, I'm back on the cocktails, sell cocktails at home delivery. Can we get 10 customers to buy 10 cocktails? Okay, we've got a week to do it. How do we do this? And then breaking that down so it's really clear, specific. Keep it small, test it out, either completely screw it up but learn from it, or it actually works, but understand why it works, and then see how do you then grow that to that next stage. Because a lot of these tests, you'll kind of get that initial traction, but then scaling that is a whole nother, different kettle of fish. So it's really important to really make sure that you are learning from the failures and what is actually working.
Brilliant. So a quick question for Mohan, I guess. E27 is known for its events and kind of offline programs, and obviously your business has had to change significantly. So how are you rolling this out, testing and kind of knowing what to pivot and what to go into? What does it look like for E27 right now in your team?
Yeah. So I think for us, we identified this as a problem, but also a huge opportunity, right? Sometime around early February. We made a decision that we could either just like really freak out and then like scramble on what to do, or we could actually completely refocus the company on doing something that could be radically different, but position the company in a very different way. But we were mindful of keeping like the viewpoint on the company's vision, right? So I think the way we looked at it is that this was a much more efficient, sustainable, in an impactful way of us executing our mission, right? So what we ended up doing is that we had a good sit down with the company. We came up with a plan, but I think we were also very open and honest with our employees that the plan is going to be subject to changes, and as much as possible, we got weekly feedback inputs, and we would kind of like do these micro pivots on a weekly basis, and exactly like what Jen said, right? Test a lot of these small ideas. Right. So in the early days, a lot of it was driven around talking to customers, getting feedback from them, building some sort of a data set on what is it that users wanted, or where is it that we could make an impact to users. And then a lot of it was on testing small features, making small changes to the website, the copy, but making sure they fit into a larger plan. Right. I think during a pivot phase, especially for us, right, the team wanted to know that we at least had a sense of what we were doing and we were not completely walking in blind. And I think that's where leadership really had to step up and show that as much as they don't know, they do have a plan. And even if the plan doesn't work, they do have a fallback plan. They do have a way to figure out how to make that work. So while it was a bit, it was patchy and challenging at the start, at some point, right, you started to see a pattern, and then you started to see slow traction. And I think at every little moment, right, we were celebrating wins. The moment we got our first customer, celebrate that as a win. The moment we hit the second one, make it a bigger win, right? And then make every like micro failure a learning process, and trying to figure out what can we learn from this? What can we do better from this? Put it into it. And I think the other thing that I wanted to be mindful also, in such a moment, right, it's very easy to get pulled into many different directions. Like everyone has an amazing idea. Everyone wants to contribute in a positive way. It's really important to maintain an idea bank, to put a focus on like, okay, at least for the first month, which are the ones are we going to focus on? And to make sure you revisit the rest on a regular basis. I think your team wants to know that their contribution is at some point looked into. And what might not be relevant today might actually end up being relevant in 4 weeks or 6 weeks. So you don't want to miss out on those research and value that was done in the past. So now we've got a fairly robust structure around handling, new requests, new ideas, problems, feedback from customers, and then rolling that back out into the product side. But it really took a lot of figuring out at the early stage to get it right.
Brilliant. I love that you said celebrate wins along the way, as well as making micro failures learning opportunities. I think what we've also seen with our Crazy Domains customers is that, yes, some of our customers are online, or, a lot of them are actually about to come online. And perhaps during this period when they're pivoting, there is this perception that pivoting is potentially a failure of some part. And I think that's Jen is like, absolutely not. You have to do this. Yeah, and that's exactly it. It could be this preconceived notion that if you pivot, you failed, you haven't read the market right, or something's wrong with your business. But I think it's really about mindset and about being open to that. Yeah, for sure. So in terms of
it's really interesting, because I think that the thing is, it's like you have the sorry.
No, go for it, Maxine. Please.
No, just just like really quickly, because I think the thing is, there's a difference between like pivoting in your strategy and changing your goal, right? And I think that's what people need to realize, is that you can't be too rigid with your strategy to get to the goal, And as long as your goal isn't constantly changing all the time, then you're going to make progress no matter what. So I think just that like distinction between not changing your goal, but just changing your strategy in the way that you're pivoting is probably a good way to go.
Brilliant. I like that. So pivot in your strategy, but don't change your goal. Okay. So in terms, let me just jump to my questions really quick. So I think in terms of making the switch, Maxine, what do you feel is some advice for someone who is looking to pivot when it comes to looking for opportunities? You mentioned just now listening to what the customer, what the market is saying. So how are some ways that businesses that are tuning in today can look for opportunities when it comes to pivoting their business?
I think the main thing that I always try to look at is what people are saying, and I try to think about where they would be talking about this stuff. So I know that from my experience, a lot of the initial data that I gather is mostly from forums, and looking at, I know this is a little bit strange, but looking at the questions that people are asking in the Q&A of, other companies that might be in a similar industry to you. And then I kind of like to kind of patch that together and try to find, okay, well, maybe, yes, there's all these like dominant players in the market, but they're not servicing, a certain customer base that's looking for something quite specific. And I think that working in a niche market right now, along with having a community-led company, is where a lot of people are finding opportunities now. Like, it's so much better to have 1,000 repeat customers that love your service and they identify with your service than, maybe having 100,000, but not many of them are actually repeat customers. Maybe they're just a one-off customer. So I think some entrepreneurs are now kind of considering that they would prefer to be a very brand strong, community-led company rather than just being like a really big one. And I think like this is something that when I speak to entrepreneurs or people who want to kind of start a business, is that they think that they have to be like an Elon Musk, or like, just like they have this image of their head, because when you think of entrepreneur, you have these really like intimidating images of like Jeff Bezos and like Elon Musk and all these like massive names and figures who are obviously doing amazing things, but people have to understand to reflect on what they want, right? Maybe your idea of a business is, making something and selling it online. And that doesn't make you any less of an entrepreneur than anybody else. The whole point is that you've gotten started. And I think that's the main thing, is that people need to be really realistic with themselves, with their lifestyle, their wants, and not to be intimidated by other people's journeys.
Absolutely. So I think you mentioned a good point, which is maintaining loyalty and having that regular customer base. Now, going back to that survey that we ran, so 76% of our attendees, are already pivoting or in the process of pivoting. For those businesses, how do they then maintain that, I guess, change communications to their customers to say, this is what we were doing before, but this is what we're going to do now? Are there some ways, Mohan or Jen, that you can maintain that change comms? Because I think that's really what's happening when you're changing a business. You need to make sure that your existing customers are not suddenly disconnected from your brand or what you do. So maybe we'll start with Mohan, if you could share your thoughts on that.
Sure. So I think the first part is to at least come up with a basic plan, right, on what you want to do. At least how you want to approach it. Have a very clear. I think it's important to break it down into very small, micro phases. So that let's say if you have a 13-week plan, like for me personally, or in the company, we use OKR, so we work on 13-week plans for everything. And what we do is that we track it on a weekly basis. So week by week, right, we're tracking where we're going, and then we're trying to figure things out along the way. So having that week by week plan at least gives people the opportunity to realize in micro ways like how they're moving forward, but also if they're not, right, what can they do to move things around. The second thing I think, which is something we did right straight away in February, is to have a conversation with all our customers. So we had a conversation with most of our important customers where we specifically told them, this is what we're planning to do. We got their feedback to see whether, hey, did that make sense from them, because they had worked with us for so long. We even got them to give us ideas on what they were thinking, what are problems that they were looking at, And then that's where actually a lot of opportunities came. So having that open, transparent conversation with customers was really helpful with us. In fact, we're having a similar conversation with one of these customers that was supposed to work with us for our events this year, but it didn't happen. And they're still continuing the conversation to figure out how to do that next year. And lastly, right, is that transparency feedback loop with the team. I think keeping the team engaged, checking how they're feeling with the level of uncertainty that's going on is really important. So regular check-in sessions with the team, making sure that they are supported emotionally, but also from a resource standpoint in this entire process is really important. And like I said, I would really break it down to a weekly based model and then come up with a structure around it.
I like that you said that. So transparency, talking to your customers and kind of doing these check-ins in phases to make sure that you're on track and you're keeping all your different stakeholders updated.
Yeah.
I'm just going to jump.
If I could just borrow on Maxine's community-led model, because I love that model quite a bit, right? I think also being vulnerable, opening up to our community, sharing with them what you're doing. We launched our pro badges this week. And before we went to that launch, we actually reached out to our communities and said, hey, these are 4 or 5 designs that we have. Which one do you like, right? Taking that feedback and having that conversation, I think that's really valuable as well.
I like that you said be vulnerable and actually letting your customers or your community feel like they are part of this pivoting journey with you. So it's not just something like, hey, this is what we are doing and you're just attending. It's you're part of that process.
Yep, exactly.
Jen, I think you had a comment or something that you wanted to share.
I was just saying that I think it's point on the point. And I think you think about startups actually engaging with their communities. It's just not how it was done back in the day, so to speak. So I think that's where you can get that astronomical growth because you do have ambassadors from your first customers through to your last. So it's really important. I think it's really being nailed in these with Prosper, etc.
Brilliant. So I'm just going to jump in because I think we've got some questions that are coming in as well. And I think it would be good for the panel to kind of go through these. So what are some of the challenges? This is a question from Daryl Chung. Just going to hop in and out of the question area. What are some of the challenges faced when approaching a pivot? And how should companies, founders, or leaders communicate this mindset effectively to get everyone's buy-in across the process? So I think, Mohan, you shared a really good point about breaking that down into different phases. Jen, what about you and your team? How are you communicating that, in terms of as being a leader to communicate that change that's happening in your organization?
I think it's important that you bring along people a part of that decision. So it's not just you going, hey, by the way, we're going from a blue logo to green, or instead of selling soda, we're now going to sell, apps or whatever. Here's some really bad examples that I can give today. But I think it's going, hey, here's the problem. How do we solve this together? Let's work out the first thing that we want to test, and then let's try this out. Okay, what does everyone think we should test? Let's put all the ideas on the board, like Mohan's suggesting about, keeping all those ideas together. Let's pick one. Let's put some priorities together and go, okay, we've got a week. I think getting everyone behind those decisions really makes everyone just as invested as you are in that change. Trying to force change doesn't always work. I'd like to see somebody who has done that.
Valid point. So I think another thing to think about is, and I know Mohan, you mentioned having this idea bank. I think that's a brilliant idea because, this I guess restriction or this constraint has also created a lot of opportunities and ideations, and people are way more creative about ways to solve things. So when you're going through that list of ideas, and this is a question to all three of you, how do you know whether something is worth exploring or testing? I guess that's a good point because there could be so many things that are coming in. So how do you actually prioritize or decide which are the ideas that you want to go into? Maybe I'll flick that on to Maxine.
Yeah. So I think the idea banks are the most crucial part of your decision making when you're thinking about the next steps. And what I find would happen with teams is that they're doing the work that they want to do, but then they're already kind of visioning in the future some future problems that might come up, some exciting new features that are going to expand your company, but it's just not the right time for it. But we don't want to lose that inspiration. And that's why it is really great to have an idea bank. There's different words for it, like a backlog or whatever, rather. And you just kind of dump all your ideas in there. And then once every quarter, it's a really great time to just go, okay, guys, we've achieved all of this. What's next on our agenda? Like, okay, we've we've hit our milestones of launching new features on our platform, and now we've seen that the customers are really receptive to it. What in this idea bank is the next logical step for us to either expand the growth, or are we happy with that growth and we want to start building another area of the business? So it's a really kind of, I would say it's unique for every single company, but you'll be surprised just like how, when your team feels invested in the vision, just how many ideas they come up with. And at first, like as a leader, I know that I felt this like probably like, I don't know, almost like a decade ago, where I was a little bit intimidated that people on my team were coming up with so many great ideas. And I realized actually this is amazing, because instead of just me thinking about it, you have leaders in every single pocket of your company thinking for like the best of your company, right? But it's difficult. I think it really depends on what your goals are, how long it takes to do that next step or that next task, and the return that you're going to have from that task. And I think I would use that like those three kind of models to understand if it's the right task for now or for later. But you'll be surprised just how many kind of left field ideas that you didn't think would be necessary now, but 6 months later, it's like the perfect thing to do, and you already kind of have the solution for that. And it's really brilliant seeing people take accountability over the ideas and start building the company as if it was their own. That's a really wonderful thing to see.
Brilliant. I like that. Having accountability, I think everybody in that organization should be having that accountability. I've got another question that's come in. I think we've thrown this acronym around a little bit, but question from Anne-Marie. For Jen, what are OKRs? Can you please share with us a little bit?
I'm so sorry. So OKRs are basically
I think all of us.
So I think they were actually started by Google, within the Google company, when they were, they're kind of big now, so it's not even worth saying startup, but when they first started. But basically it's, you set a list of your main goals, your overarching goals, and then each goal gets broken down into which team is in control of those goals. And then underneath that, then they're setting their mini tasks, shall we say, to complete that large goal. And you do this every quarter, and it means that the whole you sit down with the whole company and set these up so that everyone's really aware of what's going on across the whole business, what needs to be impacted, what are the levers that they can really drive the company. And it's a really easy way of being able to communicate kind of what's happening behind the scenes to everyone, so that, the classic marketing versus tech team, oh my gosh, you haven't developed these. Well, yes, but we've got these, 100 other tasks to kind of complete or cards to get through. So it's a great way for transparency and communication throughout the team, but it's also a great way to keep everyone heading in the same direction. There's a lot of free templates online with Excel spreadsheets that basically you just put in it, you magically fill in your stuff and it all magically populates. So just, Anne-Marie, Google like the letter OKR template, put free because we're all stingy, and you'll find one available.
Brilliant. I think a really quick question for each of you, and I'd like to hear in terms of, people are pivoting already, but now some of them have already started pivoting. We want them to think about what happens after the pandemic, long-term scalability and things like that. So what are the top 3 things that you would say entrepreneurs or businesses need to think about post-pandemic to make sure that what they're planning for now can continue, after this situation? So I think, Mohan, I'll flick that question on to you. What are the top 3 things that you would say would help a business in the long run?
Yeah, so the stuff that I'm personally thinking about alongside with my team, right? And I'm making sure that I'm sharing this with them so they're engaged in the process, right? Is firstly that, like, whatever is it that we are building and doing is going to be valuable to the larger, broader base of our users. And it's going to continue to remain relevant and valuable to them for a long time, right? And that's ideal because, you see, we're a small company, we're resource tight. We want to make sure that we are impacting as many users as we can in as much ways as possible. So that long-term impact is something that we are mindful of, and we want to make sure that whatever we're doing is not just for like short-term or just for this a few months, right? The second thing I think that's very important is for the welfare, the mental health, and the upskilling of our employees, right? I think you can come up with the best plan and the vision and all that, right? But if you don't equip your team with the resources they need, if you don't provide them the training, the mentorship, the guidance, and the space, right, to make mistakes, and also making sure you're checking in with them to see whether everyone is going through that process well. I think that's something we definitely want to focus on. Everyone moves at a different pace. Some people are really happy when it's uncertain. Some people actually get really afraid, and that affects their personal lives as well. So making sure that over the next few months, right, everyone is getting comfortable with the process. They themselves are growing along with the company is really valuable. And the last part would be stakeholders. I think communicating with stakeholders, whether it's your board, your shareholders, your co-founder, and your customers, right? Sharing with them what you're doing, letting them know that you have a long-term plan and the direction you're moving. So you're keeping them vested and involved in this future process is really critical. Because you want to make sure that, during the down periods or the parts when things are not going so well, they're there to support you, they're there to back you up, and they're there to help you in the process. And you also want to make sure that they are in line with the future plan that you have to avoid any future confusion, right, with these key stakeholders. I think that stakeholders can always offer a perspective that is external, that will at least help you to think bigger and broader. Because sometimes for even for founders or even employees, right, because you're battling a lot of day-to-day challenges, you can have a certain amount of tunnel vision and be myopic on the execution plan. Whereas like your board, right, because they're looking at many different organizations, like one of my board member probably sees 20 different companies pivoting right now. So he can offer a ton of insight and value for me so that I can be better prepared for the future plans. So I would say these are the three top of mind things for me.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Mohan. I think really good insights. Maxine, what about you? What are 3 things that you think a company or brand can do to prep themselves as much as possible post-pandemic?
Well, yeah, I think Mohan pretty much like summed it all up. But if I had to add something there, I'd probably say resiliency. So obviously communications are a really big one. Longevity of your pivot is also a really big one. But then also the resiliency of this like new pivot that you're doing. So what if hopefully there's not going to be another pandemic, but if there, sorry, just the thought of that is just, I'm sure people can relate, but
trying to focus on
if there is another situation, if there is another situation where we're in an unfortunate time, then I think wondering, okay, well, do I have to pivot again, or is this something that can kind of like long live these really kind of harsh environments? And the thing about harsh environments is that it doesn't really matter if it's a pandemic or a natural disaster. A lot of the overlapping problems are the same. So being able to go, okay, yes, I've pivoted now, and having the logic of, well, if I'm able to pivot and create a successful company in this pandemic, if there's a future threat, am I going to be resilient enough to survive that, or do I have to pivot again? Because hopefully you don't. Hopefully the pivot is you realizing how to better serve your customers and create a better product and company, rather than kind of going for like a free-for-all and out of panic. I think that's kind of the one that I would add to Mohan's is resiliency.
Brilliant. No, definitely. I think mental resilience, it's so important now, not just on the professional front, but on the personal front. Like all of us doing this call across different time zones, working from home. I think it's really top of mind for sure. Now, I guess last but not least, Jen, what about you? What are the top 3 things that you would say a business or an entrepreneur needs to think about to make sure that they are moving from pre-pandemic, what we're in right now, to post-pandemic and thriving beyond this situation?
I think the learnings that you've taken and structures that you're probably setting up during this time, so the testing, failing, learning, has to stick through, because it's no matter whether it's going in from a pandemic, out of a pandemic, to whatever 2021 has to offer, which I'm sure will attempt to chop 2020. We just don't know what's coming, right? So I think keeping up that versatility, keeping up the ability and structures in place for the team to really keep adapting and trying things out so that you're constantly moving and reshaping depending what's coming your way. And, you know, as things work and things don't, you can kind of push them up and down to really drive the business. And I think for, I guess, having that mindset, I think during what's happened, it's almost better that you've launched or are running your business through this time so that you're going to feel like you're, you know, not running through mud next year, fingers crossed. It's going to feel like, you know, you're in a really nice smooth road. And again, with my really bad examples, but, you know, you're going to run that much harder and you're going to be that much more resilient because of everything that everyone's been through. So it can only be a positive, really.
Absolutely. I like that. I feel like now we are in the kind of difficult period, but everything else is just going to seem so much easier after. Just looking at the time, I think we're almost running out of time. So what I will do is I will recap with a couple of key points, I guess, gems that everyone has shared. So for the audience, first step is testing small things one at a time. So micro pivots. I really like that. That was a good one. This is from Mohan. Don't freak out, focus. Very good point. I think you just need to think about what you need to do and not get caught up with distractions. This is an opportunity to focus on what matters and strip away the unnecessary. Think about how you're going to make impact right now, but also long term. Maxine, totally valid point. So think about how you're creating impact for your customers beyond this period so that you stay relevant to your audience. Celebrate wins and make micro failures learnings. I think that's so beautiful because sometimes we get caught up with this concept of pivoting being failure. So I think celebrating wins for sure and making those micro failures learnings. Maintaining an idea bank. So really tapping into the team, getting ideas from them. You know, this is a time for innovation and creative thinking. So having that, you know, at our easy access. Pivoting your strategy, not your goal. Very valid point. So making sure that you maintain what your broader goal is, but keeping your strategy very flexible. Tuning into what your market needs by listening to forums, talking to customers and listening to what they have to say. I think Mohan, you also mentioned not just customers, but stakeholders so that you don't get caught up in tunnel vision. So having different perspectives to give you a different lens. Change communications for sure, breaking it down into micro phases so that you keep your target audience and your stakeholders informed about what you are doing and letting them feel like they are part of the journey by being vulnerable. Maintaining transparency with your team and giving them the resources and support that you need. So for all of you small businesses out there who are running your own teams, just keep in mind that your team is also part of this process and they are with you in this pivoting journey. And then we've shared a lot of things that you can do to, you know, take the next step. So I think that pretty much wraps up our session. Any last comments from any of you before we close this off?
Just keep smiling.
That is a very good one. Maintaining the positive mindset, right?
Yeah, have fun. Have fun in the entire process.
Yeah.
Keep smiling.
Have as much fun as possible.
Yeah. It's gonna be a journey, so we just gotta roll with it. Keep smiling, have fun. Get a liter of cocktails, as Jen has mentioned in her keynote, and I think we'll be good. Thank you so much, Fennel. That was really incredible. Really appreciate you making the time to be here at OnlineFest. And of course, you know, we've still got the chat going. So if there are more questions that are coming in, happy to have that answered in chat later on. So thanks again and looking forward to speaking with each of you soon. Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
bye.
Bye.
Bye. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for that panel. I think that was a really, really good chat. You know, we heard a little bit about how small businesses and entrepreneurs like you have an opportunity to pivot, that, you know, pivoting is really not a sign of failure, and you actually have a chance to uncover new opportunities as a business. Don't think about just what's happening right now, but think about how you're going to be able to create impact for your customers beyond this pandemic. Now, as a next step, this is not the end of the session. I'd like to invite you to join us in our breakout tracks. So first up, we've got a breakout track titled From Idea to Execution, a product design workshop. So how do you know if your product is well designed for your customers? We have two people who will be coming in. Gabby from Crazy Domains, and Diana Xavier from Vend, and they'll be talking about how to create a product that resonates with your customers. The other track that we are having is blogging to thrive in a pandemic recession. Now, do you currently have, or are you thinking about having a blog, and how can you actually create this such that it's an opportunity for you to turn your leads and visitors into leads and paying customers? So Logan Lanka from Crazy Domains will be talking to you about that in his session on how to leverage a blog to get more business. So with that, do jump into those tracks. We also have an expo zone which you can explore right after this, so the event is not over. Just click on the tabs on the left side and you can explore those areas. And I look forward to seeing you at our next festival. But till then, have a good time.